It started with a pink notice duct taped to my front door, like some kind of public shaming ritual. Final warning. Unpaid fines $3,250. It screamed in bold red letters. I stood there, iced coffee in hand, wondering what kind of circus the HOA was running this month. My name's Riley Andrews. I'm a carpenter by trade, ex-Navy, and not the kind of guy who backs down when someone tries to shake me down. My house sits on the corner of Maple Ridge Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac mostly filled with retirees and young families. I've lived here 6 years and never had a single issue until this year's HOA board got their claws in. At the center of it all was Karen herself, Deborah Whitmore. She's the HOA president, wears oversized sunglasses indoors, and drives a beige Lexus that she parks slightly crooked every single time. Deborah had a voice like a dental drill and the personality to match. She called an emergency meeting in her driveway, yes, her driveway, to announce a new round of compliance fines. Guess who was suddenly their biggest offender? Mr. Andrews, she said, lips pursed like she was chewing lemons. You've accumulated over $3,000 in fines due to repeated violations. For what? I asked. My lawn's cut, my trash bins are stored, and my truck hasn't moved from my driveway in a week. Exactly, she said, tapping her clipboard. Your truck is a commercial vehicle. That violates Section 5. It's a pickup, I replied. No logos, no ladders, no tools. That rule's meant for dump trucks and moving vans. She grinned like she just caught me stealing cookies. We've also noted an unauthorized structure in your backyard. You mean the tool shed I got HOA approval for last year? Oh, that approval was retroactively denied. You'll need to remove it. The shed had been there for 11 months. I built it myself, had the permit and the signed HOA form with Deborah's own signature scanned in my files. Something was off. I spent the next night combing through old emails, board minutes, and HOA guidelines. That's when I found a quiet change in the bylaws slipped in during last month's meeting. They'd updated fine structures, added vague language about aesthetic disruption, and removed the appeals committee entirely. And every change had been approved by a vote of 3 people, Deborah Whitmore, her cousin Linda, and some guy named Bruce who didn't even live in the neighborhood anymore. They were rubber stamping their own power trip. The next morning, I marched into the HOA office, which was basically a repurposed pool house. I'm formally disputing these fines, I said, dropping a binder on the counter. I've got proof that none of them are valid. Deborah looked up from her laptop with fake surprise. Mr. Andrews, we've been expecting you. I bet you have, I said. Here's the signed approval for the shed. And your own bylaws say my truck isn't a violation. You're inventing rules. She didn't even glance at the binder. If you refuse to pay, we'll place a lien on your home. That was it. I wasn't just going to fight this, I was going to expose it. I installed 2 security cameras facing the street and backyard, just in case they tried anything sneaky. Then I started talking to neighbors. Turns out, I wasn't the only one buried in mystery fines. Anthony from 2 doors down got fined for excessive wind chimes. Melanie got hit for overwatering. Even old Mrs. Jenkins got a bill for having non-regulation shutters. I made copies of their violations, stacked them in a folder, and kept digging. Deborah's name kept popping up on every questionable decision. I called the county clerk and asked about HOA filings. That's when the Real bomb dropped. The financial reports Deborah submitted didn't match the county's copies. According to the records, the HOA had collected over $80,000 in fines last year, but only reported $35,000. The rest? Gone. No paper trail. I didn't just have a case. I had a loaded cannon, and I was about to fire it right back at them. The next time I saw Deborah was at the Saturday morning community coffee hour. She insisted on hosting in the front garden of the HOA building. Her table was set with stale muffins and sugarless tea, surrounded by the same few bored loyalists who always acted like they were auditioning for a reality show. I wasn't there for the refreshments. Deborah, I said evenly, holding the manila folder under my arm. I've got some questions about your financial reporting. Her expression barely twitched, but her hand paused mid-pour over a paper cup. Now's not the time for complaints, Mr. Andrews. This is a community gathering. You're welcome to a blueberry muffin. I'm good. This won't take long. According to the county's records, the HOA reported $35,000 in fine revenue last year. But based on the violation notices collected from just 22 residents, I've tallied over $79,000. That's not a clerical error. That's fraud. There was a pause long enough to make everyone around the table shift in their chairs. Those numbers are taken out of context, she said, voice clipped. You're not an accountant. You wouldn't understand how our budget works. Actually, I said, pulling out a folded document, I had a forensic auditor go over your filings.
Pro bono.
He's a friend from my Navy days. He flagged 15 separate inconsistencies. And I've already logged a complaint with the County Office of Neighborhood Governance. They're sending someone next week. Linda, her cousin, turned pale. One of the other board members, a wiry man named Greg with a permanent sunburn, muttered something and stood up. Are you accusing us of embezzlement? Deborah asked, tone now sharp enough to cut drywall. I'm not accusing, I said.
I'm documenting.
And I've got statements from multiple residents saying they paid fines in cash at your office. Funny thing is, none of those cash payments show up in your ledger. You're crossing a line, Riley. And you crossed it first. You've been using this board to enrich yourself and bully homeowners. That ends now. I left her there, surrounded by her muffins and her silence, and walked straight to the sheriff's substation on Ridgepoint Boulevard. I filed a formal report for financial fraud and provided all my documentation photocopies, sworn neighbor statements, and the auditor's letter. The deputy I met with, Officer Morales, took it seriously. She scheduled interviews with 5 residents that same weekend. By Monday, a county investigator was walking door to door with a badge and clipboard. Deborah responded by sending out a mass HOA email stating that malicious actors were spreading dangerous misinformation and that the board had retained legal counsel. But what she didn't know was that one of her own board members, Greg, the same one who walked off during the coffee hour, had contacted me privately. My name's still on those reports, he told me when we met in the park behind the tennis courts. But I didn't sign half of them. Deborah forged my initials on at least 6 documents. Would you be willing to sign a statement? I asked. He nodded. I already did. Gave it to the county investigator yesterday. That was the crack in the dam. By Wednesday, the HOA office was cordoned off with yellow tape, and Morales herself supervised the seizure of Deborah's desktop computer. I watched from the sidewalk as they carried out boxes labeled 2023 financials and fine notices unfiled. Deborah stood nearby, arms crossed, spitting venom at anyone who dared meet her eye. You'll regret this, she hissed at me as they loaded the last box into the cruiser. Only if they don't find what I think they will. But they did. Oh, they did. Turns out, Deborah had been pocketing thousands mostly in cash fines paid by residents too intimidated or confused to push back. She'd been doctoring receipts, logging false expenses, and even submitted HOA repair invoices from a non-existent landscaping company registered under her nephew's name. She created fake votes in the meeting minutes by listing names of former residents who had moved out years ago. The county issued a cease and desist, froze the HOA's accounts, and appointed an interim administrator to oversee operations while they conducted a full audit. But the real hammer came 2 weeks later when a grand jury indicted her on charges of wire fraud, falsifying public records, and conspiracy to defraud a homeowners association, a felony under state law. The news hit the local paper's front page. HOA president indicted in fraud scandal. A photo of Deborah in handcuffs accompanied the story. I won't lie, I bought 3 copies. With her gone, The interim administrator, a no-nonsense woman named Denise Tran, called an emergency town hall at the high school auditorium. I sat in the front row, along with about 60 other residents who had finally come out of the woodwork. "We're conducting a full review of every fine, every complaint, and every board decision made in the last 18 months, Denise announced. "And we'll be holding a special election next month to replace the board." She pointed to me during the Q&A. "Mr. Andrews, several of your neighbors have nominated you to serve on the Oversight Committee. Would you be willing to accept?" I didn't hesitate.
Yes.
"But I have one condition." Denise raised an eyebrow. "No more closed-door meetings. All HOA discussions should be public, recorded, transparent." She smiled. "Agreed." That night, I came home to a driveway full of neighbors. Someone had brought pizza. Kids were riding scooters down the sidewalk again. Anthony strung up lights between his porch and Melanie's, and even Mrs. Jenkins brought out her infamous peach cobbler. I didn't give a speech.
Didn't need to.
People were laughing again, talking freely, no longer worried about whether their front door was the wrong shade of taupe. Greg wandered over with a beer and handed it to me. "You know," he said, "she really thought no one would ever question her. Thought she'd run this place forever." "She forgot one thing," I said, popping the cap off. "This is still a neighborhood, not her personal empire." We clinked bottles and watched as someone started a fire pit in the middle of the cul-de-sac. For the first time in a long time, Maple Ridge Drive felt like home again. Rain was falling the night I got the letter. Not an envelope, an official packet hand-delivered by a uniformed county clerk, sealed with a stamp from the district attorney's office. I hadn't been expecting it, but the moment I saw the seal, I knew it wasn't just some thank you note for my trouble. Inside were 3 pages. The first was a subpoena. The second was a witness statement request. The third listed me as a cooperating party in a criminal investigation under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
Qué rico.
Apparently, Deborah's mismanagement had gone far beyond petty cash theft and into the realm of organized fraud. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from worry, but because I spent hours cataloging every file I'd collected. I had photos of the altered violation notices, spreadsheets of the unreported cash fines, emails where residents were threatened with liens over invented infractions. I even had a voice memo I'd recorded during one of Deborah's driveway meetings where she bragged that no one reads the bylaws anyway. That was going to age like milk in federal court. The next morning I met with Assistant District Attorney Sonia Patel in a glass-walled office downtown. She wore a navy blazer and gold pen clipped to her lapel, and she didn't waste time on small talk. "We've confirmed at least 26 instances of falsified financial records," she said, flipping through a binder as thick as a phone book. "But what's more concerning are these shell companies. We believe Ms. Whitmore used 4 different business entities to launder HOA funds. 2 of those companies filed taxes under a non-existent EIN. One of them lists your HOA's headquarters as its primary office." She pushed a photo across the table. It showed the pool housed the same one Deborah had called the administrative center. A rusty HVAC unit sat half-detached from the siding. The idea of someone laundering money out of that moldy shack was almost laughable if it weren't so real. "Who else is being charged?" I asked. "Her cousin Linda's already cut a deal. She's agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentencing. Bruce, the 3rd board member, fled the state 2 weeks ago. We've got a warrant out for his arrest. And the rest of the board? Under review. But we're more interested in you, Mr. Andrews. You've done half our legwork already." I spent 4 hours that day answering questions, verifying timelines, handing over hard drives, and signed statements. When I finished, Patel stood up and offered her hand. "You just helped us unravel one of the most elaborate HOA fraud schemes in county history." I didn't know whether to be proud or furious that it had gotten that far. By the end of the week, the neighborhood was buzzing. A news van parked outside the cul-de-sac, and a reporter tried to interview Mrs. Jenkins, who promptly sprayed him with her garden hose. The county installed a temporary administrator's trailer across from the pool house, and Denise Tran worked late into the evening sorting through more than a decade of neglected records. At a community meeting held in the middle school gymnasium, she addressed over 80 residents, most of whom had never even attended an HOA gathering before. "We've identified over 140 fabricated infractions," she said, tapping a screen that showed a list of names and violation codes. "Most of these were used to generate illegal revenue or intimidate homeowners into compliance. We're in the process of refunding every fine collected under fraudulent pretenses." People clapped, not politely, loudly. Some even stood. There was a sense of raw relief in the air, like everyone had been holding their breath for years and finally exhaled at once. Then Denise turned to me. "Mr. Andrews has been instrumental in uncovering and documenting this entire scheme. Without him, the county would still be in the dark. I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you. I don't usually like the spotlight, but that one got to me." Anthony gave me a firm handshake afterward and whispered, "You didn't just fix a problem. You blew it to pieces." But the real fallout came 2 weeks later, during the federal hearing. I wasn't required to attend, but Patel invited me anyway. Said the judge might appreciate a face to go with the evidence. I sat 3 rows behind the prosecution's table in a courtroom that smelled like stale coffee and varnish. Deborah entered in a gray pantsuit, flanked by her attorney. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she wore no makeup, a far cry from the polished dictator we all remembered. When they read the charges: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying financial records, obstruction of justice, and misuse of public funds, she barely blinked. The judge, a white-haired man with a gavel that looked like it had been carved in the 40s, leaned forward. "Ms. Whitmore, these are not administrative errors. This is a sustained campaign of deception that impacted dozens of families. Do you understand the gravity of these charges?" Her attorney answered for her. "We do, Your Honor." She was denied bail. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the bright sun. A reporter shoved a microphone in my direction, asking for a comment. I didn't give one. I just walked to my truck, slid behind the wheel, and let the quiet settle. Back in the neighborhood, things were changing. The new board, assembled by emergency election, had 5 members, all volunteers, all long-time residents who had never been involved before. I didn't run, but I did help them establish a digital archive of all HOA documents so every resident could access meeting minutes, budgets, and bylaw changes from their phones. Transparency wasn't just a promise anymore. It was standard. The fine system was completely overhauled. Instead of punitive charges, the board created a mediation process, face-to-face meetings where disputes were resolved with actual conversation. They even brought in a retired judge once a month to help with bigger cases. No more anonymous letters taped to doors. And the best part? The HOA refunded over $40,000 to residents. Some got checks. Others had their dues waived for the year. One family used theirs to fix a leaky roof they'd postponed for months because of bogus citations. A few weeks later, I found a brown paper bag on my porch. Inside was a bottle of bourbon and a note written in Sharpie, "For the man who burned down the castle and built a town hall." I never found out who sent it. I didn't want to be anyone's hero. I just wanted my neighborhood back. No more threats, no more shady meetings, no more fear of speaking up because someone might fine you for the color of your porch light. One night, while replacing a fence panel in my backyard, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Greg, the former board member, who'd turned witness. He looked better, lighter. "I took a job upstate," he said. "Starting over. Figured I owed you a goodbye." "You did more than most," I replied. "You told the truth when it counted." He kicked at a rock with his boot. "You ever think it'd go this far?" I figured something was wrong. Just to know how deep the rot ran. He nodded, then added, "A lot of people are watching now. Other HOAs. They're nervous." "Good," I said. "Maybe they should be." After he left, I finished the fence in silence. The wind blew through the trees, and for the first time since all this started, I felt like I could finally hear it again. No more shouting matches. No more clip notices. Just wind and wood, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing justice hadn't just visited, it had moved in. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was ours again. And this time it would stay that way. The new board asked me to help draft a transparency charter. I said only if we do it in person with the entire neighborhood invited. I wasn't about to let anything get tucked away in fine print again. We held it in the community park under the pavilion, folding chairs in neat rows, coffee and thermoses brought from home. Denise Tran opened the meeting with a clipboard and a tone that invited attention, not fear. She introduced the new board, a retired librarian, 2 small business owners, a schoolteacher, and a postal worker named Leo who had lived in the neighborhood longer than some of the trees. After they laid out the proposed transparency charter, mandatory public notice for all meetings, open voting procedures, budget disclosures, I stood up and asked one question. What systems are we putting in place so this never happens again? Leo adjusted his glasses and answered, "We're hiring a third-party CPA to audit every financial decision quarterly. And we're creating a rotating ethics committee, 3 members from the community, chosen at random each year." That earned nods from the audience.
No applause.
Just quiet, serious agreement. A good sign. But something else had been gnawing at me since Deborah's arrest. A line in one of the county investigators' reports I hadn't been able to shake. Funds possibly routed into personal legal settlements predating board tenure. That meant she hadn't just stolen from the HOA. She might have used that money to cover something bigger. Something older. I filed a request for public court records through the county's online system. It took 4 days, but when the documents came through, I sat at my kitchen table and read every page. 7 years ago, Deborah had been sued by a former business partner in a failed contracting firm. The suit alleged she'd misappropriated client funds and falsified receipts. The case had been settled quietly, with a confidentiality clause and no formal admission of guilt. But the settlement amount, listed in a separate filing, was almost $40,000. That matched the timeline right before she joined the HOA board. I called ADA Patel. "I think she used HOA funds to pay off a private settlement," I said. There was a pause on the line, then, "Send me everything. If it checks out, that's a whole new level of criminal exposure." I emailed the files and went to bed with a pit in my stomach. I didn't think it could get worse. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Patel. Her tone had shifted. "Riley, we found something in the metadata of the financial spreadsheets you gave us." "What kind of something?" "They were edited on a laptop registered not to the HOA, but to a private law firm in Chicago." That made no sense. Deborah doesn't live in Chicago.
She doesn't.
But the laptop was leased under the name of Stewart and Halbridge, LLP. That's the firm that represented her in the civil case 7 years ago. And one of their junior partners is her nephew. That's when it all snapped into place. Deborah had funneled HOA fines into a shell company, then transferred those funds to an account connected to her nephew's firm, who then used that money to settle an old legal debt under the guise of consulting fees. The HOA wasn't just a piggy bank. It was a front. The DA's office expanded the investigation. Federal agents got involved. The scope widened. In a rare move, the state attorney general's office opened a fraud and racketeering case. Patel called to give me the update personally. They're calling it systemic misuse of community assets across state lines. If convicted, she's looking at upward of 15 years. And the nephew? He's being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and aiding in concealment of stolen funds. He'll be disbarred before the end of the month. I had to sit down after that call. Not because I was afraid, but because I realized how close we'd all come to never knowing any of it. If Deborah had just stuck to petty fines and crooked votes, maybe no one would have dug deeper. But greed has no brakes. The trial began in late September. I was called to testify on day 4. The courtroom felt colder than I remembered, more clinical. Deborah sat at the defense table in a navy blazer, her expression unreadable. Her attorney tried to discredit my testimony by suggesting I had a personal vendetta. I didn't argue. I let the evidence speak. Emails, bank transfers, approval forms with forged signatures. The jury didn't need convincing. The verdict came in after 6 days, guilty on all counts. Deborah Whitmore was sentenced to 18 years in state prison, with parole eligibility in 12. Her nephew got 5. Stewart and Halbridge LLP was fined and placed under investigation by the State Bar. The court also appointed a restitution officer to oversee the return of stolen funds to the HOA. The neighborhood received a settlement of over $90,000. With those funds, the new board reinvested in the community. They resurfaced the pool, repaired the tennis courts, and added solar lights along the walking trail. But the most symbolic change came when they tore down the old pool house, the one Deborah had used as her personal office. In its place, they built a small community center. Nothing fancy, just a one-room space with folding tables, a bulletin board, and a locked file cabinet for public records. It had wide windows and a front porch with 2 rocking chairs. At the grand reopening, Denise handed me a small plaque. It read, "In honor of those who stand up when no one else will. May this place always belong to its people." I didn't hang it inside. I mounted it right on the front post, where everyone could see it walking in. Later that evening, I grabbed a beer from the cooler and sat on the new porch. The sun was low, casting long shadows past the basketball court. Leo joined me, settling into the second rocking chair. "Feels different now," he said. "Because it is," I replied. He didn't say anything for a moment, just rocked gently, the chair creaking under his weight. "You sticking around?" "For good," I said. "Someone's gotta make sure we don't forget what happened." We watched as a group of kids rode bikes across the cul-de-sac, laughing as they wove between chalk drawings and lawn chairs. No one was worried about fines. No one was checking paint swatches or measuring mailbox heights. The neighborhood had finally become what it always should have been. Ours.